couldn't
And
figure
actually,
them
Peter,
out.
maybe just back us up about how you got into academia, what you wanted to do, what interested you as
Oh,
a
sure.
young guy. Yeah, what did you want to do with your life?
What did I want to do with my life when I was a young guy? Say not a young guy anymore. So what did I want to do with my life? Uh, I wanted to explore ideas. I wanted to figure out what was true. And as I went along that path, I figured out that what the I figured out that the process of figuring out what was true was more important than figuring out what was true, because it's very easy to, as Feynman says, the easiest person to fool is yourself. So you have to make sure that you have a rigorous process. And so one of the things subsequently to that I've learned is I almost never ask somebody why they believe something anymore. I know that this is a heresy, but one of the things that I've learned from studying belief for my whole life, writing about it, reading about it, delving into the literature about it, is that when you ask somebody why they believe something, they'll give you reasons for why they believe it. And what's actually happening in that process is they're talking themselves into a higher confidence level because they're hearing themselves talk about why they believe what they believe. But what you should be doing is giving them the gift of doubt, is enabling them to doubt their own confidence in their beliefs. And you do that with a very simple question: under what conditions would you be willing to change your mind? Like, what evidence would I have to show you to change your mind? When you do that, people don't talk themselves into more, particularly in the moral domain, more confidence. So I got into philosophy. I've always loved Socrates. I used to read the Platonic dialogues as a kid. I got into it through the Socratic method. I'm convinced. I just did an interview and someone said, "What's the greatest technology that we have, the greatest invention of humanity?" And I said, "There's just no question. It's the Socratic method, just hands down." And so I was fascinated by this idea of how do we come to truth? How do we figure out what's true?
And Peter, just pause there. What is the Socratic method?
Oh, it's a way of asking questions. Socrates does it with other people, but ultimately it's a way of asking questions toward yourself. And so a way of asking you if your beliefs are, if you believe that what you claim to believe. So it has 5 stages. It begins in wonder, and then somebody will pose a hypothesis like, what is justice? You're wondering. Justice, in the hypothesis, justice is paying your debts. And then it has an elenchus or a counterexample. And the next thing was, this is from Plato's Republic, first 3 books of the Republic. Someone will say, well, what if I borrow a knife? Well, maybe in this modern context would be a gun. What if I borrow a gun from somebody who later becomes criminally insane? Do I give him back the knife? Then you go to the next stage. Yes, you do. Okay, then we've held that as provisionally true. Or no, you don't. So then you go back with another hypothesis. It's a way of thinking through difficult questions, honestly and sincerely.
It's so alien to the state of conversation at the moment in our hyper-partisan, hysterical, Twitterfied discourse.
Correct. That's because people aren't, a lot of reasons for that, but social media has contributed to it. But we have lost the sense of truth. We've lost understanding why that's important. And the moral mind, in many senses, was overriding the rational mind. And we're seeing the consequences of that everywhere.
When you say we've lost the sense of truth, I'm just trying to imagine the pushback to that. And the pushback, I suppose, would be, we are seeing a demotion of a very stuffy, old-fashioned, narrow, data-driven, scientific version of truth in favor of bigger moral truths like the great arc of oppression that certain groups have endured, and we're trying to remedy those. What do you make of that?
Well, that's Martin Luther King's idea. The moral arc bends towards justice, and Michael Shermer's written a wonderful book, and Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, he writes about that very eloquently. I don't see even those conclusions themselves were brought on by, in the case of Shermer and Pinker, rigorous scholarship. And so, look, have there been injustices? Yes. Have there been narrow focuses on, or has there been a too narrow of a focus on, I don't know, some aspect of human well-being or what have you? Yeah, sure. But all of the answers to those questions have to take place within a framework of reason, rationality, and evidence. And the farther you stray from reason, rationality, and evidence, the more arbitrary your beliefs become.
Okay, so let's loop back to you. You're a Socratic nerd boy who's who loves this stuff as a younger man, and you go into academia and you begin, you begin where and teaching what?
Well, I taught in the prisons for my dissertation. I used the Socratic method to help prison inmates to reason morally and think critically, and thus desist from criminal behavior. So not just not go back in other words, not recidivate, but to actually desist and stop criminal behavior by making better moral decisions, by giving them the tools to do that for themselves, to self-empower them. And so then I've been teaching at many universities for many years online. I've been teaching on ground. I've taught just many universities.
And where did you start getting a sense that things were going awry?
That's a really good question. I thought initially that when I started teaching in Portland State that there must just be a lot of people who had mental health issues because of the way they were acting. I never connected that to anything larger, like any zeitgeist or system problem initially, maybe like 2011, 2012. And then slowly over time, I started to put the pieces together.
What was happening?
What was happening? How can I possibly explain this? Okay, what was happening? The institution was being engulfed by certain moral principles that were overriding traditional educational conceptions of what an education is and why it matters. That's the low def version of what was happening.
How did you respond?
By asking questions. What's the evidence for this? I'm unclear. Under what conditions would you be willing to revise the belief that trigger warnings, safe spaces, and microaggressions are good for kids? I remember once I was at a faculty meeting and I asked one of the main proponents of this a very sincere question. I said, do you, and I got to be careful because I'm trying intentionally not to dox anybody. I said, do you really believe? And because I'm curious, this guy's I'm trying not to say, he had all the credentials to make any reasonable person be like, wow. I said, do you believe that it's only been in the last 5 years of 2,400 years of recorded history that we've figured out that cultural appropriation is wrong? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, so nobody thought of that before, or that was never in Kant or never in any of even the obscure thinkers, or never? And he said, yes, I do. And so from those conversations, and to his credit, he said that as opposed to being offended or accusing me of a microaggression, which has happened on so many occasions. So I started to see this madness overtake my colleagues and overtake public policies in the administration. And I started to see the weaponization of offices in the university against dissonant voices. And all along the way, I just kept thinking, well, geez, maybe there's something I don't understand. Like this was, before the conceptual penis. Maybe there's just something I don't get here. And so I just kept, I'd go to a diversity panel and everybody had the same opinion. I'm like, wow, what kind of diversity panel is that? So I wasn't figuring it out. And I started asking questions. And the more questions I had, I could tell by the responses from people that something wasn't right. Instead of just answering the question, almost anything else would happen.